Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents I Am Ayah, The Way Home, by Donna Hill. Narrated by Bianca Drew. I wish to tell you a story. My story. The story of how I come to be here, in this foreign land. Sometimes what I tell you will make no sense. Sometimes it will sound absurd. But in between those moments of doubts and dismissal, you may come to believe it possible that within each of us lives the essence of our existence. Beginnings, middles, and endings. The paths that those before us took to bring us here. Some of you will close these pages, toss them aside. But there will be those of you who will embark on a journey of discovery, word by word, image by image, memory by memory, from the beginning until now, with me and for you. I speak to you now through the voices and struggles of those who came before and after me, so that you would know. My journey to here began on the beaches of Mendeland. It was 1839. I was in my 15th year, happy, looking forward to my marriage to my beloved in 6 months' time, on my 16th birthday. Oh, how I loved him. I would make an excellent wife and mother, I knew. My baboo had taught me to hunt, to kill with my bare hands if no weapon was handy, to protect myself against man or beast. My mama taught me to cook, to mend, to keep house, to take care of my 6 sisters and brothers, to heal wounds with herbs, to honor my elders. None of that was to be, though. None of it. You may have heard or read of the revolt of captive Africans on a ship called La Amistad. You may have heard that an enslaved man, Sengbapia, led the revolt, or you may know him as Joseph Cinque. That is all true, but there is little more than folklore known about the young girl who helped him, who found the fabled loose nail that unlocked his shackles and those of the others. She was among the hundreds of Africans, along with Cinque, captured on the shores of Mendeland. The first half of our torturous journey was aboard the ship Takora. Below deck, they separated the men and women in holds not big enough for a small child. For days, hours, weeks, unimaginable horrors of darkness, the roiling of the ship, stench, sickness, humiliation, torture, and madness rampaged through the infested hull. Disease and lack of food and clean water plagued the deadly journey. By the time of transfer to La Amistad in Cuba, they had reduced the enslaved numbers to little more than half. The crew had thrown 50 dead and diseased captives overboard. Those who survived were put on board La Amistad for the second half of the journey to Port Principe, Cuba. But within days, the revolt led by Cinque ensued. The men forced the remaining crew to head back to Mendeland, to home. During the days, the crew seemed to head back to Africa, but at night the devils turned the ship around toward Cuba. Back and forth, east, west for 2 months, until La Amistad grounded near a place named Montauk Point, Long Island. Safe, finally free, But the United States government took the ship. The captives were thrown in chains, taken to Connecticut, and imprisoned, deemed property, and therefore part of the ship's cargo. The ship's manifest read 53. But when my brothers and sisters were sent to the Connecticut prison to await the trial that would alter the course of slave trading, there were only 52. I had escaped. Say my name. Chapter 1. New York City, West Village. Winter. Present day. I understand. I'll be there as soon as possible. Yes. Thank you. Alessandra Fleming squeezed her eyes shut and slowly placed her iPhone face down on the metal work table in the studio. She dragged in a shaky breath and willed herself not to cry. Blinked. No, don't you dare. The time for crying was long gone. Wouldn't matter anyway. Her father didn't need her tears. She and her father, Jeremiah Fleming, Jerry to his friends, had a strained, or, if she was being honest, non-existent relationship. They'd barely spoken in more than 2 years. The last place she wanted to be was back home. She flipped her phone over and checked the time. It was barely 9. She'd arrived at the studio 2 hours earlier to get a head start on her work. But so much for that. Alessandra collected her heavy down coat and leather tote bag from the hook on the wall, then scanned the table that was covered with her photographs. Majestic images of modern cityscapes, dark caves, the aftermath of earthquakes and floods, weddings and births. She'd traveled extensively around the country and to the Caribbean, photographing the best and the worst of humankind. Clearly she had enough material to mount her show. The problem was finding the thread that held an idea or theme together. She was lacking cohesiveness. The thing that defined her as an artist, that gave her work meaning. Her signature. She gave the images another look, sighed, turned off the lights, and hurried down the narrow gray hallway to the flight of stairs that led from the workrooms up to the main level of the art gallery. The heavy glass double doors opened onto a maze of stark white walls that guided the art lover to move in and out of the space, unable to bypass any part of an exhibit. Strategically placed illumination targeted the framed images and sculptures and projected just enough light to draw the observer closer to experience every detail. "Hey, Leslie." Alessandra stopped at reception. Leslie had just arrived and was settling behind her desk. She slipped off her glasses and turned away from her computer screen, casting startling sea-blue eyes on Alessandra. "Hey, finished already?" she asked. "No, not exactly. Listen, I have to go home." "Sure." Leslie frowned. "See you tomorrow." "No, I mean home. Back to Sag Harbor." Just letting the 2 words slip across her lips made her skin hot and her stomach churn. She cleared her throat. "My father had an accident. Broke his hip." "Oh, no! I'm so sorry." She reached out and briefly covered Alessandra's copper-toned hand with her own white one. "Thanks." Alessandra pressed her palms against the lip of the desk. "I actually don't know how long I'll be out. Hopefully only a few days." Leslie nodded. "Tough time for this to happen with your show coming up. I mean, it's awful about your dad," she added clumsily. Alessandra offered a small smile. I know what you mean about the show. She slowly shook her head, sighed. It'll be fine. She glanced over her shoulder. Is Stephen here? Stephen James was the gallery owner and curator. He opened this West Village location about 15 years ago, and during that time, he'd steadily built a reputation for finding and showcasing some of the most talented up-and-coming artists and sculptors in the country. Alessandra had met Stephen by chance, shortly after she'd graduated, when she was photographing the opening of the memorial at the World Trade Center. A man had come up to her and made some suggestions about lighting and angles and said he liked her style. He'd given her his card, and it took all of her self-restraint not to gush. This was the Stephen James. She'd taken him up on his kindness and stopped by his gallery. He'd offered her a job curating exhibits if she promised to hone her own skills. She did, and her reward was a coveted show at the Stephen James Gallery. It had taken her 5 years and hard work, but here she was with her dream coming true. Her own show coming up in barely 2 months. Just missed him, Leslie was saying. Said he'll be back in a couple of hours. Alessandra's stomach fluttered. The last thing she wanted to do was blow things with Stephen. Not now. I'll give him a call and let him know what's going on. And I'll have my cell if anything should come up while I'm out of town. No problem. Take care. And a speedy recovery for your dad, she called out. The waiting list to get a show with Stephen was well over a year, which was why Alessandra had to do whatever she needed to in Sag Harbor and get back immediately. She still had so much more work to do. This was not an opportunity that came often or ever for so many aspiring photographers, and she could not blow it. Not after all this time, and certainly not after what she'd turned her back on to get here. As an icy wind whipped a swirl of snow around the corner of 14th Street and sought refuge down the back of her neck, she was reminded of who she was and why she was here. Her father. Manhattan was a way to escape him and everything he reminded her of. Behind her camera lens, she could create her own reality, see what she needed or wanted to see, not what whirled in her head and made her soul ache. As she hustled down the narrow, crowded streets, passing bistros, bars, smoke shops, sex shops wrapped around old brownstones, and newly arrived condos, she took a moment to relish the vibrancy of the part of the city she'd come to call home. The West Village was the hub of the nouveau and old guard, an eclectic blend of tastes, races, gender-bending definitions, social classes, and financial fluidity. A place for those who sought to create their own normal. Her one-bedroom apartment was within walking distance of the studio, both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because she didn't have to rely on public transportation or drive through the teeming streets of Manhattan. A curse because she often found herself still working into the early hours of the morning, knowing that home and her queen-sized bed were only 15 minutes away. She opened the waist-high iron gate and inched up the concrete stoop, mindful of the snow that had begun to cover the steps. She turned her key in the lock of the heavy wood and glass door and stepped into the narrow vestibule. She was again grateful for her apartment on the 2nd floor of the 6th floor walk-up, right above Miss Edith, one of her favorite people in the world. She climbed the steps, the polished wood creaking beneath her feet. When she opened the door to her space, a sudden flash of seeing herself stepping into a dim, lantern-lit room that smelled of damp wood, sea moss, and dirt floors leaped in front of her. The surreal moment seized her breath. She gripped the doorframe, shook her head, and the image scattered like startled birds. But for a moment, the scent of damp wood hung in her nostrils. Alessandra blinked rapidly, dragged in a shaky breath, and the aroma of the fresh flowers that sat in a vase on the hall table replaced the scent of dampness. She frowned, then closed the door behind her. That, whatever that was, had happened before. At first, she'd thought the images might be the remnants of photos that she'd taken at some point and forgotten. But then, they seeped into her dreams and she'd awaken, unnerved and melancholy, and nothing could account for the sense. Whatever it was starting to rattle her. Alessandra dropped her purse on the hall table next to the vase of flowers, slipped out of her coat and scarf, and hung them on the rack. She toed out of her Uggs and walked down the hall to her bedroom. On either side of the hall, she'd hung framed black and white photos of Manhattan. She'd taken the shots over the years, replacing them periodically with new versions and visions of New York. The one closest to her bedroom was the only one that she had of home, the dock at Sag Harbor, lined with boats of varying sizes, white with red stripes, blue stripes, names of the owner's heart's desire emblazoned on their sides, their sails flapping in a summer breeze. Her mother, dressed all in white, her dark hair gleaming against her sand-toned skin, had finally given in to her daughter's pleading and posed for the camera. She'd taken it when she was about 15, before everything went wrong in her world. Her mother had fussed with her about taking that camera everywhere, but it was the last photo she'd taken with her mother in it, and no matter how painful images of home were, this was one photo she would not part with. Ever. She opened her bedroom door and had an overwhelming urge to simply flop down on her unmade bed and sleep for hours, but knew that was not an option. She took a suitcase from her closet and began to pack what she thought she'd need for the next week or so, being sure to include heavy sweaters, wool socks, and her one pair of flannel pajamas. Being near the water in the middle of winter was a recipe for icy days and chilly nights. She added her sneakers, slippers, and a pair of dress shoes. She tossed her toiletries into a smaller bag, checked her laptop case for her power cords and chargers, and added her Nikon camera, flash drives, film, and batteries to her oversized tote. As she scanned the array of bags, the reason for them being there truly hit her. She bit down on her lip as a tear dribbled along the curve of her cheek. It was those nurses who had wanted her to come, not her father. She was sure. He'd never ask for her, she knew, and her throat clenched. She swiped at her eyes. He hated her. That was the truth of it. Blamed her. Always had. Her chest heaved. Alessandra walked to the window and lifted the white embroidered curtain aside. A siren cried in the distance, in harmony with the rumble of delivery trucks and honking car horns. The humps of dirt-covered snow lined the avenue like bent old men, only to be dusted again with white powder, as if that would somehow obscure the truth of what lived beneath. She snorted at her own analogy. How apropos, a testament to her life. She turned away and let her eyes roam over the sun-drenched space. The carefully selected furnishings of Manhattan chic on the low end gave her a moderate sense of accomplishment, but the accessories of pottery, bold-colored throw pillows, and hand-woven scatter rugs from the litany of boutique shops that peppered lower Manhattan were no more than a fancy coating over her own life. Humph. That was something for a grown-ass woman of almost 30 to have to admit. But things were changing. Everything she'd been working toward was finally in her grasp. All she had to do was go see about her father and then get right back home, to her real home, to Manhattan. Chapter 2. The faint, mouth-watering aroma of sizzling bacon drifted beneath the space of her front door, pulling Alessandra away from the dusty corners of her mind. She half smiled, realizing it must be 10 o'clock. Edith Samuels cooked bacon every single morning at 10, like clockwork. Mrs. Samuels, the one constant in my life. Mrs. Samuels looked out for her. Not in an obvious or nosy way, but Alessandra knew that the invitations to dinner were Mrs. Samuels' way of making sure that Alessandra was doing good. And she could listen for hours to Mrs. Samuels' stories about coming up north during the Great Migration, how she'd fled Virginia in the dead of night with only a few crumpled dollars, a brown bag of fried chicken, a sack of clothes, and a will for something better. She'd run from a hard life of sharecropping, constant terror, and everything she'd ever known, good and bad. Alessandra could not imagine going through all that. Moving away from her childhood home in Sag Harbor was about as difficult as her travels had ever been. There was a featherlight knock on her door. She frowned, went to the door, looked out the peephole, and smiled. "Miss Edith, how you doin'?" she greeted, pulling the door open wide. Edith Samuels was barely 5 feet, with solid white hair and smooth as silk skin, the color of a new penny that belied her 80-plus years. But her diminutive appearance was a facade for the steel that ran down her spine and flowed through her veins. "I'm blessed," she said in her usual greeting. She held out a sturdy paper plate covered in aluminum foil. "I don't know what got into me this morning. Started cooking and couldn't seem to stop. Heard you come in and thought you might be hungry. Grits, bacon, home fries, eggs." She laughed, and fine lines of joy teased her dark brown eyes. Alessandra took the proffered plate. "Oh, Miss Edith," her voice cracked, "you didn't have to." Her stomach didn't agree. She'd run out at 6:30 that morning with no more in her stomach than a half cup of coffee. Edith patted Alessandra's shoulder. "No trouble. No way I could eat it all." She tipped her head to the side and studied Alessandra for a moment. "Sometimes you just have to let go and move on faith," she breathed. She stroked Alessandra's cheek with the pad of her thumb. Alessandra blinked and blinked, but she couldn't stop the sudden surge of tears from falling. "Oh, child." Miss Edith turned her around by the shoulder and walked her inside. She shut the door behind them, took the plate, and placed it on the circular table. "Come, sit down." Alessandra was on a full-blown crying jag, heaving shoulders, runny nose, and a hiccup voice as she attempted to tell Edith about the phone call, her dire straits, and her greatest fear, going home. Edith listened, nodding and cooing, intermittently patting Alessandra's shuddering shoulders and wiping her eyes with a paper towel. "I'm sorry," Alessandra said, sniffing back the last of her tears. She blew her nose with the remnants of the paper towel. I didn't mean to dump that on you." She blinked and could feel the swelling of her lids. "It's all right. Sometimes, as much as we fight against it, destiny pulls us the way we need to go. You spent the better part of your life running away from. Maybe it's time to run to." "What are you saying?" Pretending that your past don't exist won't make it go away. Ignoring the call won't make it stop. When I left from Virginia and that life, as much as it was all I knew, and as much as I was unsure what the North would hold for me, I knew deep in my spirit that if I didn't try, I would never have no peace. And it was a hard journey. Many days I thought I should go back, but I didn't turn round. I made it. I made a life. My only regret is not getting to see my folks one last time. Make peace. Tell 'em how sorry I was for leaving them behind. I'm sorry, Alessandra said softly. Long time ago, I done forgiven myself. She waved her hand, then focused on Alessandra. Things different now. You can go back. Get answers to all the questions you've been too scared to ask. Make peace with your father and yourself. You really think so? Alessandra's voice wobbled as her eyes searched Edith's for confirmation. Edith smiled gently and pulled Alessandra to her flattened bosom. I know so, she whispered. After Edith left, Alessandra reheated her breakfast and devoured her food as if she hadn't eaten in days. She mused over Edith's words of advice. It had been more than 10 years since she'd been back home. Over 2 since she'd actually spoken to her father. The last time they talked, she'd asked for $500 to cover her rent, as she'd spent too much on a new camera and lighting equipment. A fact she didn't share with her father, and he went on a rant about how she was living. What was she ever going to do with her life? Why couldn't she come home? She rallied right back about how it was her choice. She was grown. She had a life in New York as a photographer. Why couldn't he understand that and support her dreams? You'll never forgive me. Never, never, never. It wasn't my fault, she'd screamed before tossing the phone against the wall. But the following day, when she'd gone to the bank instead of the ATM to save on fees and withdraw 20 of her last $200, it stunned her to see that a balance of $1,500 had been wired into her account. She wanted to call and say thank you, but thank you would have meant admitting that her father was right. And if he was right, then she was wrong about everything. And if that were true, then her life made little sense. So, as ashamed as she was to admit it now, one day turned into 2, then a week, a month. The more time that passed, the harder it became to turn the page back to a simple thank you. And that was 2 years ago. Now her father needed her. Their roles were reversed. After all these years, she could make up for the excuses, the not coming back because of the ghosts of guilt that still lived in that house and behind her father's eyes. As Miss Edith said, maybe it was time to stop running from and run to instead. Alessandra boarded the jitney at 40th Street and Lexington Avenue, hoisted her bags onto the overhead rack, and took a seat in the last row next to the window. She shoved her hands into the pockets of her down jacket and felt the cool metal of her ring of keys. She pulled them out. The silver key stood out among the faded faux gold of the rest. She fingered it between her thumb and forefinger. It was the key to the front door of her father's house. Her stomach clenched as she squeezed her eyes shut, but she couldn't blot out the memories that bloomed to life behind her closed lids. She'd left that home the week after her 18th birthday and hadn't been back since.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?